Welcome then to Vicky Varner, who's amongst other things a part-time professor at the University of Philosophical Research in Los Angeles, although she's very itinerant, and as I say, I never quite know where she's going to be calling from, but it's Cambridge this time. As an individuation coach, Vicky coaches individuals to identify and develop their natural typological strengths. She has a PhD in depth psychology, Jungian and archetypal, and wrote her dissertation on typology. She's presented memorably at many of these online conferences, and today her topic is the typology of imaginal figures. So welcome, Vicky Jo, and over to you.
Thank you, Jerry. And let me get my screen sharing. There we go. Hopefully everyone can see that. So I'm thrilled to have you here. And as Jerry said, my topic is an introduction to the typology of imaginal figures. And yes, I am in Cambridge, where my husband Robin and I are at the moment looking after a Jack Russell Terrier. So as we get underway, I'd like to design our alliance with one another on this Zoom session. So here are some agreements that I'd like us to work with. First of all, if we could all be on camera. I realize some people are camera shy, but it does mean a lot to me to be able to see people's faces. So do me a favor and be visibly present so we can try to create a live conference experience together. Will you raise your hand if you agree to that? Yes, yay, okay. Please have a loose sheet of paper and some art supplies or drawing tools. I'll be asking you to use them during an exercise later on. Show of hands. Yes, great, terrific. We do have a couple of exercises and breakout rooms scheduled, and I'd really like you to participate. So will you agree to that? Show of hands. Yes, you will. Great. And if you can save your questions until the very end, that will be much appreciated. Now, this session will move fast because I want to cover a lot of ground and also squeak in an exercise. And luckily, it is being recorded, so you can watch it again if you miss something. Just so you know where we are headed. This session surveys various models of psychological parts, focusing on the inner structures that comprise a human psyche. It's a bit on the academic side, but I'll try not to get too dense or heady. And this is such a big topic that it's hard to cover in this time frame. But as we get underway, I want to thank all the people working to make this session possible. Everyone at BAPT, Catherine, and of course, Jerry, who's emceeing for us today. And if you have any tech problems, please turn to Jerry for help. I won't be able to help you. So who am I? I'm Dr. Vicky Jo. I have a PhD in depth psychology. I'm an MBTI master practitioner who qualified in 1996, last century. I'm a certified inner strength practitioner through Linda Behrens. I've logged more than 150 hours in workshops with John Beebe. I'm currently the senior copy editor for a Jungian journal out of Los Angeles, a former professor with the University of Philosophical Research. I'm a professional life coach with a PCC status through the ICF, and more that I've skipped over. So let's get into the meat of things. The only way I know how to start this off is with me. It's all about me. So in 2002, I was in the midst of my coach certification. And during one weekend training, we began learning about coach approaches to parts. Now, parts work involves the exploration and understanding of different aspects or parts of an individual's personality or psyche. And we often make reference to these parts in everyday language, such as when we say, part of me wants to get the house cleaned up and part of me wants to move into a smaller home, or part of me wants to take a walk and part of me wants to take a nap. Other times we feel taken over by something, and we might even say, I don't know what got into me. We rarely think twice about making statements such as these. I'll never forget sharing with another participant about how much I loved parts work and how great it was. And he agreed and said it reminded him of training he had done in alchemical hypnosis training or something. And my ears perked up and I thought, what's that? I made a mental note to check that out. I might have to sign up for that training. And then somebody else chimed in about a program they had done using a different framework. It might have been voice dialogue or something. And then somebody else talked about working with parts using psychodrama. Oh, my poor little brain got a cramp at this point. And I remember thinking to myself, I'm going to die before I have a chance to learn all these different modalities. How many are there? My feeling of overwhelm was palpable. I'm surprised I didn't pass out. It was like looking at the menu at the Cheesecake Factory. And in case you don't know, that's an American restaurant chain renowned for its 250 item menu, ranging from seafood, salads, pastas, steaks, burgers, and cheesecake. So that's how I felt when I began surveying all these different parts frameworks. I believed I had found a mountain I could never climb, no matter how greatly I aspired to. What a bummer. So life went on, but this was always something throbbing gently in the back of my mind. If only, if only, if only. But at least, hey, I could read about the topic and try to identify some of the frameworks and approaches. And then one day, I picked up a new book, and it gave me an epiphany so loud that angels began to sing. The book was Subpersonalities by a Brit, John Rowan. He authored this book in the 1990s, and it sounded as though he had been on the same quest I was on. He was a psychotherapist trying to find his standpoint about the same topic. And he wrote, "The question of whether there are parts of a person which can be talked to and worked with as if they were separate little personalities with a will of their own is one which has fascinated nearly everyone who has had to work with people in any depth." Wow, I felt seen. He was singing my song. And then he wrote the following passage, which he became celebrated for, and he wrote several versions of it in his later books. It's long, 362 words, but I'm going to read you the entire thing because it synopsizes my entire presentation. Hang in here with me. Quote, "It is an extraordinary fact that there is at present," and this was in 1990, "no systematic book on subpersonalities, and the word does not appear in any text on personality theory known to me. It is not in the dictionaries of psychology nor in the dictionaries of psychotherapy, yet the thing itself is used by virtually every clinician who has ever written about working with people, and by more and more psychologists paying attention to what is there as opposed to what is supposed to be there. Whether with Freud, we talk about the ego, the id, and the superego. Whether with Jung, we talk about the complexes or the archetypes. Whether with Federn or John Watkins or Byrne, we talk about ego states like parent, adult, child. Whether with Lewin, we talk about subregions of the personality. Whether with Pearls, we talk about the top dog and the underdog or retroflexion. Whether with Klein or Fairburn or Guntrip, we talk about internal objects. Whether with McAdams, we talk about imagos. Whether with Hilgard, we talk about the hidden observer. Whether with Tart, we talk about identity states. Whether with Denzin, we talk about the emotionally divided self. Whether with Winnicott or Lake or Janov or Lang, we talk about the false or unreal self. Whether with Gurdjieff, we talk about little eyes. Whether with Goffman, we talk about multiple selfing. Whether with Stone and Winkleman, we talk about energy patterns. Whether with Maurer, we talk about deeper potentials coming to the surface. Whether with Mayer, we talk about a community of self. Whether with Ornstein, we talk about small minds. Whether with Gazaniga or Minsky, we talk about agents and agencies within the mind. Whether with Gergen or Martindale or O'Connor or Shapiro, we talk about sub-selves. Whether with Strauss or Rawson, we talk about sub-identities. Whether with Marcus, we talk about possible selves. Whether with Kilstrom and Cantor, we talk about self-schemas. Whether with T.B. Rogers, we talk about prototypes. Whether with Bears, we talk about outer personalities, or whether with Assagioli or Redfern, we talk about subpersonalities. All the time, we are talking about the same thing. This thing, which is not mentioned in the textbooks of personalities. End of quote. And I'm behind. Yay, end of quote. Okay. Whew. Now, gotta say that passage was written 34 years ago, and we must admit the landscape has changed significantly since then. For one thing, we would surely add to Rowan's list, reevaluation co-counseling's description of distress patterns, Hubert Herman's I positions in dialogical self-theory, positive intelligence with its saboteurs, and Dick Schwartz's internal family systems, also known as IFS, which was actually conceived before Rowan's book was written because Rowan refers to it in his text. So as of right now, the internal family systems model is the reigning parts model. In fact, many people act as if it's the only parts model ever created and don't seem to realize it has a long tradition that precedes it, as I've enumerated here. Schwartz himself even acted like he came up with the whole idea on his own, which infuriates those of us who are sensitized to academic traditions. Now, some have claimed parts are the central feature of Greek mythology, and the gods represent our human parts. And others say the planets represent our parts astrologically. They're embedded in our horoscopes. Asian gods, such as Sarasvati and Ganesha, are also said to represent parts of us. And we can also cast our eyes back to Plato, who believed the soul has three parts: intellect, spirit, and desire. So this idea of humans having parts can be traced all the way back to the dawn of Western European history, and additional schools and traditions featuring parts work might be included. For instance, myths, folklore, and fairy tales in various traditions and cultures often depict characters and stories that symbolize different aspects of the human psyche, and that can provide insights into the multiplicity of the self. And then there's alchemy and hermeticism, which describe the transformation of an alchemist's psyche through the union of opposing elements. Not to overlook mystical and shamanic practices in indigenous cultures that aim at connecting with different aspects of the self and the cosmos through encounters with inner beings or guides representing different facets of their psyches. These all might be viewed as forms of parts work, emphasizing an exploration and integration of diverse inner experiences. And then there are contemplative traditions like Buddhism and Taoism, which emphasize mindfulness, introspection, and self-awareness for understanding the mind and achieving inner harmony. They teach practices that involve observing and exploring the multiplicity of our thoughts, emotions, and sensations. And these practices promote skills for meeting and working with different aspects of the self. And we find echoes of them in every practice that engages in parts work. Now, all these various traditions don't use the terminology or conceptual frameworks of modern psychology, but they lay the groundwork for explorations of the multiplicity of the self and the integration of its diverse aspects. These antecedents enrich our understanding of parts work and reveal its roots in human experience across all times and cultures. And here, Rowan is basically saying in his passage that the entire domain of modern psychology is comprised of nothing but parts. And the only differences between these different schools are their conception of the self or personality and the structures and jargon each school uses to describe them. Oh boy, this took a lot of pressure off me. I did not have to study every single discipline after all, just identify its parts. This magnificent giant decoder ring gave me the secret key to understand parts within the domain of psychology as a whole. Well, now let's take everything Rowan was talking about in that passage and attach it to a visual historical timeline. So this is an expansive, sweeping, macrocosmic view of parts in human beings. And now let's do a U-turn and get a bit practical with these grandiose ideas. We're going to home in on the focal point, the object of all these philosophical and intellectual speculations, which is, drumroll please, the singular, ordinary, everyday human being. In other words, let's turn our camera around and focus on the main microcosmic point of interest, which is you. So I'll invite you to shake off all this intellectual speculation I've been spewing and ask you to bring your attention inside. And this is when we want to invoke one of the contemplative traditions and gently focus and direct our awareness to our own thoughts and experience. So I want you to bring to mind something that triggers you. Surely at some point in your life, you have been triggered by something, and the more recent, the better. Or maybe you know you are about to be triggered, such as some people feel about big family holidays. They know there's one family member who will get on their nerves. That's the kind of triggering experience I'm after. It can be anything. And don't worry, because you don't have to disclose anything. So it can be something really embarrassing. Have no fear. I'm going to give you several seconds of silence to close your eyes and allow a trigger to come to mind. And if you have lots of triggers, just choose the one nearest to this moment in time and gently let the others go. And now is the time to reach for paper and those art supplies I asked you to bring to the session. And I'll invite you to connect with your unconscious and invite it to give you an image that represents the part of you that is triggered. And then capture this image on your paper in some fashion. Now, I suggest you start with a squiggle or a doodle that represents the energy you feel within about this trigger. Now, you are not trying to draw some dramatized photograph of the experience, like, here's the time I threw a turkey leg at my brother-in-law because of his stupid political views. No, 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 that's not the idea at all. Invite your unconscious to provide you with some kind of abstract image that represents the energy of the trigger. And then let that reveal the identity of the part that is triggered. So this is not art, it's psychology. And now I'll allow you a whole 3 minutes to create that image that's a representation of your triggered part. And my advice is don't think of an image, but just allow the unconscious to guide you. And if you cannot draw, and I cannot, start out by drawing a squiggle, and the unconscious should take over and then guide your hand for the rest of it. And now I'm just going to be silent and allow you that 3 minutes to draw. Okay, 1 minute left. And 30 seconds. Okay, time's up. Pencils down, as they used to say in school. Now, whenever I do a creative exercise like this, I always derive a lot of pleasure in seeing what people come up with. And I know you only had 3 minutes, so nobody's expecting a Rembrandt or a photograph. But I'll invite everyone to hold their images up to their camera on the count of 3 so we can take a look and get an idea of the amazing diversity of images that have come to join us today. So here we go. 1, 2, 3. Up with the images. There we go. Oh, I just always love this. Look at that collage of interesting things. Just wonderful. Yeah, when you blur the background, use a green screen, it flips in and out a bit. All right. Well, thank you so much. Now, here's the tricky bit. I'm going to put you in short breakout rooms in pairs and invite you to talk about each other's drawings. But I do have a specific structure I want you to follow. So let me get back into my slideshow. Did it do it? That didn't do it. This is what I want, and that. There. Okay, good. All right. So for these breakout rooms, I have some strict guidelines to follow. Now, most importantly, avoid storytelling. Do not tell your partner the story of your trigger. Just leave that temptation behind. Put all your stories aside and set your attention on the artwork instead, as if you were entering into an art gallery and seeing a masterpiece for the first time. It's not about you, it's about the art. Let the image speak. Invite the image to tell you its story. Now, this will be a whole new muscle for some of you. Meet the image on its own ground and listen to its language, and I'm going to provide you with some questions to use. Listen to your partner with the curiosity of a child. Keep an open mind and listen without judgment. Keep yourself to yourself, meaning don't give advice or fancy you're an art critic. Now, you won't have time for long introductions, so get right to the task at hand and make the most of it. The person with the shortest hair will show their image first. So here are the questions that I want you to use, and Robin's going to drop these into chat. And these questions should follow you into your breakout room. So as long as the chat is visible, you ought to be able to read them. Now, I know it's hard for intuitive types to use my questions instead of their own, especially since these are mostly based in sensation, but please do it anyway. Do not waste this opportunity to learn something new, and just do it my way this time out. You're only going to have 6 minutes apiece, a total of 12 minutes, so use your time wisely. We'll try to warn you at the halfway mark to switch so you won't have to remember. And Jerry, are you ready to go? There'll be one more breakout room. Fast.
Yeah.
So welcome back, everyone. If you could type a thought into the chat box about what's coming up. And I kind of hope to hear from the artists as well as the analysts. Did this process give you any new insights into your triggered part? So if you can just type a little something into the chat. I have to say that I dearly long to stop and process this entire exercise with you, but in the interest of time, I have to rush on. And I'm sorry to rush. It feels so rude. But here's a view once more of that long historical timeline about parts work. But last time I checked, this BAPT conference is not about parts work. It's dedicated to typology. So where does typology come into all this? Well, I'm going to permit myself the vanity of placing typology on a completely different historical timeline. Now, if I were truly academic and rigorously historical, I would use Jung's work, Psychological Types, to create that timeline and an overview of typology, which was sort of the point of his book. But no, I'm going to cheat and cut corners because Jung's conception of the types is really unique in history. Nobody else conceived of a spectrum of consciousness like he did, either before or since. It stands alone on this landscape. And this framework is missing from every other form of parts work. Sure, we have Ken Wilber's idea of consciousness levels, higher and lower, and trying to map consciousness to that vertical dimension. But nobody else has conceived of a spherical approach the way Jung did, what he called a compass. My audacious proposition is that Jung's framework can be combined with parts work and thereby concoct something new and psychologically useful. This is not my original idea. I confess I have a predecessor. His name is Dr. John Beebe, and he initially conceived this idea starting 30 or 40 years ago now. But I'm not going to rehash Beebe's model here. Some of you are intimate with it and can recite it from memory. But so far, I've never encountered anyone who positioned Beebe's work within the domain of parts work. And that's the construct that I'm advancing here. So with this inclusion of types, we gain greater understanding of any model of parts work for the simple reason that we relate to these parts through our type preferences. Now, I'm going to send you back into those same breakout rooms, same partner who's now familiar with your image, and only 2 minutes apiece. See whether you can type the part of you that was triggered or even the trigger itself using the 8 functions Jung identified. And again, we'll remind you to change at the halfway point. So if it works, Robin's going to drop these definitions of the 8 functions into the chat to help you match them with your triggers. This time, I'm only giving you 2 minutes apiece to type your image, and I'm perfectly aware that is not enough time. Welcome back, everybody. And once again, I will invite you to type your discoveries into the chat box while my rocket ship flies on ahead. I will get to read your commentaries later. And if you were unable to determine the typology of your triggered part, feel free to take the task away and give more attention to the challenge in private. Now, Stephen Heller once described how we organize our own cosmos or create our own reality, as some would have it, and at the same time impose our own flaws on it. When I wrote my PhD dissertation, I developed a diagram we can apply to our parts work today. So let me describe it for you. This large outer circle represents psyche, and it encompasses all of us, all the parts we have. Now we'll deconstruct each of our parts with the support of a simple matrix I invented based on a qualitative view of our parts. The first division is listed at the top, ego compatible and ego incompatible. So we can sort out all our parts by this means. Now, another way of saying it is either we like it or we don't like it. So my assumption with a triggered part is that you don't like it. The next division is also simple, albeit a little harder to understand, interiorized and exteriorized. Now, by now, we've all had experiences of interiorized parts, the inner critic, the inner child. These are examples of interiorized parts. So the inner child is typically ego compatible, while the inner critic is ego incompatible. Exteriorized parts are outside of us. and describe how we experience the outer world. I hope it's not presumptuous to think I might embody an ego-compatible exteriorized part. And that brother-in-law we threw a drumstick at is outside us, and we may consider him an ego-incompatible kind of monster and other him on that basis. So I invite you to place your own triggered part into this matrix and add any other parts of yourself you know of to this mapping, perhaps after the session ends. Last, I intend to discuss one further element of parts work, which is assessing the stance taken by any school towards parts work, drawing from monotheism and polytheism as philosophies, but free of any religious affiliations. So let me explain. Monotheistic approaches prioritize unity, coherence, and integration, emphasizing a central organizing principle or core self. This perspective seeks a unified identity and purpose, striving for consistency across thoughts, emotions, and behaviors. Conversely, polytheistic perspectives embrace diversity, multiplicity, and complexity within the psyche, acknowledging the coexistence of various psychological parts or inner selves. Here, the focus lies on integrating the diverse aspects of one's psyche. How that plays out in reality, and why I think it's a vital note to end on, is they parallel religious viewpoints. For instance, in Christianity, there is only one God, and thou shalt have no other gods before me. And certainly, get thee behind me, Satan. The emphasis is on distancing oneself from negative influences and striving toward a pure, singular ideal, being Christ-like as much as possible, which is what a monotheistic psychology aims for. From a religious perspective, polytheism refers to worshiping many gods, such as we find in the Greek pantheon. It entails the embrace of many parts, many gods, and working consciously with them all to design alliances and keep the peace, but always conscious of their multiplicity. The emphasis is on recognizing, acknowledging, and containing all of one's parts, good and bad, and being with their contradictions and imperfections, which is what a polytheistic psychology aims for. While both monotheistic and polytheistic viewpoints address psychological issues, they diverge in their conceptions. For instance, Freud's framework tended towards being monotheistic, emphasizing integration and coherence, epitomized by his focus on a singular ego amid various parts of the psyche. In contrast, Jung's framework exhibited polytheistic tendencies, and he emphasized the importance of acknowledging and working with the multiplicity within the psyche. These two philosophical leanings in parts models shape the treatment of parts. Approaches that lean toward monotheistic often seek to eliminate or deny parts, while polytheistic approaches advocate for acknowledging, containing, and forging alliances with all parts, echoing Jung's approach during active imagination as documented in the Red Book. These ideals are different. I won't lie to you, and at the risk of muddying the water, there is a third circuitous path, and that is a monotheistic, fully synthesized self on the other side of polytheism. Ultimately, we do want that singular integrated self, but not at the expense of denying or lopping parts off to look good. So I had a private exchange with John Beebe about this version of integration, and it reflects his view of an ideal path as well. But we may never arrive there during the course of our lifetime. If you don't already have a copy of today's handout, it's on the entry page for the conference in general. Jerry can help you find that. I will be continuing today's virtual session during my live session at the BAPT conference in London this coming June, but more experiential and a little less theoretical. I invite you to join me there. I think I have seconds left if anyone wants to squeeze in a question.
Sorry, you don't have to reveal this if you don't want to, but I'm curious about your dissertation, and I wonder if you can provide us with the title.
I can provide you with the title. It's on ProQuest. I've published it, quote, privately on ProQuest. I think you have to pay to get a copy of it. And I have a book deal with Routledge, a contract that I'm trying to convert it into a book. I'm not, of course, as most dissertation students are, I'm not 100% happy with what got posted on ProQuest. So what was my title? Dream the Myth Onwards.
The typology of imaginal figures. It's actually in the handout. So when you get the handout.
That's right. When you get the handout, it's listed in the reference section.
So just to say on the handout, the conference website where you signed up and where you logged in, even rather to this session, there'll be the handout is there, and you'll see it in green type. The title's in green type. You just click on it, and it'll download.
Yeah, and all the resources from today are also in that handout.
Great. So we're up to 3 o'clock. So I just want.
I made it. I made it.
You made it. That's right. So I just want to thank Vicky Jo for a really fascinating session. As she was saying during the breakout rooms, there's a lot of material there, and I'm sure in a way, we only scraped the surface. But it is a good invitation to come to London and to do a bit more with her if you can in June. It's been a great session and given us lots to think about, and thanks to Robin as well for his support during it. There's half an hour break before the next session. At 3:30 we have a difficult choice to make between Joe Maddox's session on emotional intelligence and Elizabeth Murphy's on conversations with children. We've already mentioned the London gathering. It'd be great to see some of you or all of you there. And finally, I'm going to put in the chat before I go the link to our latest beautiful and thoughtful type animation, which is on the thinking and feeling dimension. And if you haven't gone to see that yet, then please do visit, watch, and share with your friends. So thank you very much for coming. We will stay on the link for a few more minutes, but I'm going to stop recording at this point.